In today's Locked On Pelicans, I'm going to tell you why all the moral victories actually matter for the Pelicans, when they should switch to tanking for Cooper Flagg, and more in a mailbag episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans at NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with you on this Wednesday, a game day for the New Orleans Pelicans. And look, they are getting DeJounte Murray back, and that is a very good thing if you want to see some actual wins, not just moral victories here. But we'll talk about that in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today, I want to look at why the moral victories do actually matter, when the team needs to pivot to tanking, and can they keep Elfrid Payton and Brandon Boston Jr. this season? That's coming up in a mailbag episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans brought to you by Robinhood Gold. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday. If you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. So let's get into your questions here. And I picked a bunch of these because I thought they all kind of tie together in various ways. So that there's going to be some kind of threads that go through all of the segments here. So let's go to this one. And it comes from at Uptown_Amill, AMILL. And he says, are we a dynasty when it comes to moral victories? And look, that's a clever question. And it made me laugh. Because this season, oh, absolutely. They're for the most part, they've been competitive every game, and that's a good thing, given all the injuries that they've had. But it leads to the bigger point of these moral victories do actually matter. And it might not feel like it, right? They're 10 games under 500. We'll look at this in the next segment of like, they're really unlikely to make the postseason, even the play-in tournament, somewhat. So does any of this actually matter? And the answer is yes. This team needs to evaluate what they have. The front office needs to evaluate what this roster is. The team is at a bit of a crossroads here because of their salary cap situation. You can't keep everybody. Zion Williamson, Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum, DeJounte Murray, and now Trey Murphy next season when his extension kicks in next year, all make $25 or more million per year. That doesn't work. You need to figure out who stays and who goes, basically who your core is. And now you might be screaming, well, it shouldn't be Zion. I don't think that's set in stone yet. You might say it should be Brandon Ingram or it shouldn't be. Depends maybe on how he plays, on what they do, and more on that in the next segment here. You know, to figure out who your core is and who you're keeping beyond this year and who you're going to trade away this year, we'll get to that in a minute, you need to compete to do that. You need to be competitive. You need to be trying to win games. And even in losses, you know, or a lot of losses, you're gathering data. There's data points there. You're learning something about the team. When you compete but lose, that does say something. It can be good. It can be bad. But at least they're not just rolling over. We've seen far worse teams out in the NBA just not show up night in, night out. At least this team does, and that matters for something. You can say it's a lost season, but that's to you. It's not to the actual team. They're not going to view this as a lost year and be like, oh, whatever, let's just be bad. Even in losses, even if you're trying to be bad, you're still trying to evaluate what you have. And therefore, those moral victories matter, not necessarily for this season, but hold that thought in a minute because they might, but also subsequent years. Do you want to see the team go through a 4-year rebuild? Then these games and them being competitive and those moral victories matter because that's going to inform who they keep, who they don't. Look, they may not make the playoffs, and it is looking very unlikely, but every season, every game does matter when you get to the kind of granular details of it. Seeing who you trust to shoot or not. Looking at shot profiles for guys. Who plays with pace like the other night against the Indiana Pacers? Who doesn't? It all does matter. And that's why I look at that here on the show. Yeah, I'm tired of seeing moral victories, but these are things we're going to be talking about in a year from now too, next season, and that's why we talk about them here. So while these moral victories don't equal wins, and maybe that means you don't care or you're checked out, it's totally fine, your fandom is your own, but it does matter to the team long term. And when you're this injured, it gives you an opportunity to evaluate around the edges in particular, something a small market team really needs to be able to do and kind of get a competitive advantage on the margins like that. But also some of these victories, these moral victories, which because they sure as heck aren't actual victories, right? These moral victories that you're seeing now can pay off late in the season. I want to go back to Willie Green's first year here. You know, this was a team that started real poorly and then made a push late in the year to get into the play-in tournament. And I don't think this is necessarily going to happen, but it could. Look, ESPN gives them about a 4% chance to make the play-in tournament right now. That's just to get the 10th seed. But I do think it's going to be a little bit easier than in years past because a lot of these teams are beating up on themselves. So I don't think it's going to take 49 wins just to get in as the 10th seed, the 9th seed, something along those lines. I think you can maybe do it a little bit above 500. 44 wins is reasonable. And we'll look at that on the Friday episode of Locked On Pelicans here. If you want to go on a run and try and make the postseason, I'd like to see them do it. I think you'd like to see them do it as well. Maybe not all of y'all. Let me know in the comments down below. You need to see what you have and who you can lean on right now. And Willie Green talked about it that year that they made the run to the play-in tournament. They did it with a sub 500 record. That won't do it this year. But there's more talent here than there was that year in New Orleans. You know, he said a lot of these losses that we're having right now in November, December are going to turn into wins in February, March, April. And he was correct about that. These are learning experiences for the team to maybe try and string some things together late down the line when they are healthy, when they have worked through some things, when they figured some things out, when they have made adjustments. That's why that Indiana Pacers game, yeah, they lost, but you saw the zone defense work, and now you've seen the zone defense work a couple of times and get them back into games. You learned what Elfrid Payton brings to the team and why you need a point guard on the court at all times. Now you'll be able to do that going forward with DeJounte Murray back in this game and Elfrid Payton, and more on how they can maybe keep him all season in the next segment. In the third segment. So this does all matter. You can be like, oh my God, shut up, Jake, about the moral victories, and plenty of y'all are saying that, and it's fine. But it matters for when they go on a run. And if they go on a run, we're gonna point to these games and be like, that game where they were competitive against the Warriors, competitive against the Pacers. Here's what they learned from that and how they're applying it to the team now. Or we'll be talking about it next season too when we go look at Brandon Boston Jr. We saw this in this game. All of these moral victories matter long term. Today, tomorrow, no. But they do matter in the long term. So you don't get a title from them, certainly. This team might be a dynasty when it comes to moral victories because of all the injuries that they've had. But when they get healthy, they will be a good team, which makes tanking a little bit tough. So a ton of y'all ask the next question. At what point do you just tank and try and get the number one overall pick? I have a specific date, an actual date down to the minute when they should do that. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Again, tie into this segment too. That's coming up here next. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Robinhood Gold. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.25% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on IRA account contributions. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth, and these generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For specific product disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership offered by Robinhood Gold LLC. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Get ready to take on all the NFL and NBA action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL on Thanksgiving all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you realize momentum is shifting. You can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets and get in on those live updated lines. And you can do that by just visiting FanDuel.com to join today. The Pelicans tonight, by the way, 2-point favorites over the Toronto Raptors. I'm feeling good about them getting a win. It's also City Edition night. And if you place a $5 bet and you win, you're going to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com to get started. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. You know where everything about this team is also covered? The daily Locked On Pelicans newsletter. Go to LockedOnDaily.com and sign up. It's one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. The Sacramento Kings are kind of pulling away from us here in New Orleans. We don't want to let another small market team like that surpass us. We've fallen a little bit in the rankings in terms of subscribers. So run over there, LockedOnDaily.com, sign up and open it every day for the free daily Locked On Pelicans newsletter. I'm enjoying doing it. The league coverage is really good. Really good. We've got some really great NBA writers that we've hired for this to bring you insight you can't get anywhere else. You want to learn more about like full court press, more about the injuries around the league. That's a really great way to just kind of catch up on like the one big story going on around the NBA. So let's continue to talk about the Pelicans here. And when I put out the call for questions on social media, 2 places, X and Blue Sky, a ton of y'all asked this question. And it was some form of it of, when do you start tanking? At what point, I'm forgetting who said this one directly, at one point in the season do we embrace the mission for capturing the flag? Cooper Flagg of Duke, he'll be the #1 overall pick, or Ace Bailey from Rutgers, and there are a couple other players that are really good. The too long didn't listen part of this show right now, this segment is, here's when you pivot to tanking. February 6th at 3:01 p.m. Eastern, 2:01 p.m. Central. You know what that is? Tell me in the comments down below. So when do you pivot to tanking? So first and foremost, it is going to be hard for this team to do it. Not impossible, but hard. But likely, they're likely not getting a playoff spot. So you're kind of looking at a season that puts you in almost the worst place you can be in the NBA. And that's kind of in that middle ground of not outright bad, but not good enough to make the playoffs. And it's really only happening because of the injuries. They would not be 4-10 with everybody healthy. Zion, Murray, Herb, Trey, all of that stuff. We'll see if Brandon Ingram plays tonight. So likely not getting a playoff spot. The play-in tournament is even a little bit out of reach here. But you do need to see what you have. It goes back to what we just talked about. These moral victories do matter, even if it's not for this season. It is for in the future. So you are going to try and compete for a while. You're going to try and compete for a while and then see how it goes. And maybe guys get injured or they don't come back on time or other injuries happen, all of those things. And eventually, it might just depend on when Zion returns, if he returns, and what that looks like. But you consider this on February 6th at 2:01 p.m. Central. That's the NBA's trade deadline. That's why I picked that time. That's the last time you can trade someone. This team wants to be outright bad. They're going to need to trade some people. It's really as simple as that. They also need to trade people because of the luxury tax situation. We looked at some of the numbers for next year. Right now, this team is about $3.5 million over the luxury tax currently. Look, I want them to pay the luxury tax. I want them to do those things. If you're not going to make the playoffs, there's no point, 0 point in paying the luxury tax. It'd be one thing if you were going to bring everyone back next season, but they're not. If you're going to run everyone back next season, you're like, we got to keep Brandon Ingram. We got to keep CJ McCollum. We got to keep Zion Williams, all those things. If you were going to do that, then you would be like, yeah, whatever. Let's pay the luxury tax. It's a bit of a lost year anyway. We'll be bad and that'll be fine. But you're not going to bring all of those guys back. They're not going to pay the luxury tax this year, not for this team as it currently stands, just due to circumstances kind of outside of their control. So that means a trade's going to happen. The most likely candidates, if you're looking to try and make moves, this is a really top-heavy team. Then you have Herb Jones in the middle, and then a bunch of basically minimum guys. Or Jordan Hawkins is in there too. But for the most part, there's not a lot of like mid-tier salary where it's like, let's dump a $15 million guy for a $10 million guy. They ain't trading Herb Jones, right? They're not going to trade DeJounte Murray. I don't think there's any value for Zion Williamson if they even wanted to trade him. So that means Brandon Ingram, who they looked at trying to trade this offseason, or CJ McCollum, who's been my pick for them to trade for a while now. If you go back to the start of the season when I said, realistic surprises, a big one was they trade CJ McCollum. So if you trade CJ, if you trade Ingram, and then you roll with the rest of the roster, or maybe Zion's out then, yeah, you can kind of pivot to tanking. So it's on February 6th at 3:01 p.m. Eastern when they should pivot. That's because they're going to need to do something before then anyway. I think they want to try and be competitive. Maybe they make a run when they get some health back here. Maybe it starts tonight against the Toronto Raptors with DeJounte Murray coming back. And if they're capable of doing that, then maybe they kind of hold off and they try and maybe trade Hawkins or someone like that, in a salary dump situation just to get under the tax. You could do that. Or you trade CJ, you trade Ingram, maybe both. And you go, look at how bad our roster is. Now we're going to be bad. And then you are bad and you tank for Cooper Flagg or any of those other picks and try and go with kind of like a reboot of this team. And at that point, you will have been competitive enough. Now, and you kind of have an idea of who to keep. The issue with this is, the other teams that you're competing against for the top pick is not going to try and be being competitive, right? All of those other teams out there. Washington is flat out bad. They're on an 11-game losing streak. As I'm recording this, they're playing right now. I don't know who's going to win between them and the Bulls. Philly will get better. New Orleans is third worst record in the league right now, tied with Toronto. Toronto, I don't see being better than New Orleans. Utah's going to try and be bad. They have one more win. They have the same amount of wins as the Pelicans, but fewer losses. Charlotte doesn't look particularly great. Atlanta doesn't look incredible. Portland is outplaying itself, and I think they'll fall back down to earth. Who knows what Chicago will do? You're going to be better than those teams if those teams decide they want to tank and do all of that. And I think that creates a little bit of a problem. So by not tanking until February, you run into the issue of, well, okay, we're going to be with the 8th overall pick, and that's 6% chance to get the number 1 overall pick with the lottery odds. It's a 26% chance for a top 4 pick, but that's not a 50-something% chance for a top 4 pick in a draft that has at least 3 really top-heavy guys that would be good for this team. So it doesn't put them in a great spot, but at least you kind of strike the balance of we will get a good draft pick. We'll know who we need to keep. We've shed some salary, and it kind of sets you up well for next season. That's likely how this is going to go. It's different, and we'll look at this more in Friday's episode. Tomorrow, we'll recap the game against Toronto, break down the City Edition jerseys here, and then we will Friday look at tanking and the rate they need to play on. Where can they make a run? What's kind of the timing on all of this? We'll really break it down, but this is different than Memphis, who was just straight up injured like for the entirety of the season. Right now, the Pelicans are pretty close to getting people back. Murray's going to come back, then Herb's going to come back, and then hopefully Zion will come back. And they might have everyone back by the end of December. That's a good spot to be in. You can try and make a run. You still have 4 months of the regular season at that point. 3.5 months of the regular season. It's still unlikely, but you're going to have guys and you're not going to be as bad as those other teams. So it puts the Pelicans in a really weird spot. There is a very strong argument to me made because of that to tank outright right now today. And we'll make that argument on Friday. But I don't see the team doing that, and I don't think that that's the position that they're really going to be in. So that's really where the problem is. Memphis just lost John Morant for that suspension to begin last season. Then he got injured. It was like, well, let's just shut everyone down. Then Jaren Jackson Jr. got hurt too, was out for a while. All those guys were out for a long, long time. Pelicans won't really be in that situation, but they're going to have to kind of do something by February 6th. They're not going to pay the luxury tax. And I don't see them just dumping Jordan Hawkins for nothing. It's likely just trading CJ to get that long-term money off of the books. That's likely what you are going to see from this team. And that's probably when they're like, all right, we're not in it. We just traded away CJ McCollum or Brandon Ingram. It's time to be bad. Let's be bad. And then you'll see that eventually. But a lot of y'all ask that question of when do you kind of embrace the tank? You could embrace it now, they're just not going to. And I don't think they necessarily should. You can still not jump up in the lottery. You could still fall, right? Memphis only got, the 9th overall pick? They got Zach Edey, but while I think Edey can be good, I don't think he's going to be this high-end all-star starter. So there's, reasons to not do it too. You just don't want to have a lost season. I think that's part of it. So we will break that down a little bit more on Friday's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Coming up next, let's look at two players that have really shown so far, Brandon Boston Jr. and Elfrid Payton. Is there any way to keep them on the team? Let's break down the open roster spots, some more of the salary cap, and all of that. What do you need to do here to try and bring those guys back? Because it does look like they fill clear roles for this team. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Bill. With the seasons changing, I'm already dreaming of a warm weather getaway, and I love using points for travel, and I'm always looking for ways to earn more to book my next flight. So here's a life hack for you. Bilt, B-I-L-T, lets you earn points on rent payments and redeem them towards flights, hotels, and a lot more. One of your biggest investments should get you more than just a roof over your head. So let me explain. There's no cost to join Bilt, and as a member, you earn valuable points on rent and your other everyday spending. Bilt points can be transferred to your favorite hotels and airlines, and even the ones you haven't heard of. There's over 500 airlines and 700,000 hotels and properties around the world where you can redeem your Bilt points towards. Points can also be redeemed towards a future rent payment and unique experience that only Bilt members can access. So if you're not earning points on rent, my question is, why not? Start earning points on rent in the rent you're already paying by going to joinbuilt.com/lockedonnba. That's joinbuilt.com/lockedonnba, joinbilt.com/lockedonnba. Make sure to use our URL so they know we sent you, joinbuilt.com/lockedonnba, to start earning points on your rent payments today. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. By the way, you've got to check out Locked On Saints for your second listen. The whole week of Locked On Saints for your second listen. It was the bye week. Ross Jackson freaking killed it over there. 16 head coaching candidates for the New Orleans Saints, with all of the hosts from those teams giving you the insight on it. This is something only Locked On can do. This is why you come to Locked On, for us to leverage the network like that. You want insight on all of these other coaching candidates? You've got it over at the Locked On Saints podcast with perspective you will not get anywhere else. Make that your second listen today. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So this question comes from @Oceanback. Hey, buddy, I'm Blue Sky, by the way. Can you keep Brandon Boston Jr. and Elfrid Payton on the team? This is a good question. I think both have played pretty well and shown they belong in the NBA. The question is, can they make it on this team? Will it work out? So let's take them kind of one at a time here. And I think Brandon Boston Jr. so here's the situations with him first. Brandon Boston Jr. is on a two-way deal. Those don't count towards your roster spots, but they're limited to the amount of games that they can play in the NBA. They're really kind of supposed to be bouncing back and forth between the G League and the NBA. But given all of the injuries that the Pelicans have had, well, they're not using them that way, and they're all kind of getting minutes for the most part, or had been. You have Elfrid Payton on an actual roster spot. The Pelicans went into the season with an open roster spot, likely because they didn't want to sign anyone and have to pay more in the luxury tax. They signed Jalen Noel to that open roster spot, then cut him and signed Elfrid Payton because Payton was injured, even though he's with the team in training camp. So you're not going to sign an injured guy that's not going to play for you. Got healthy. They signed him. He's done well. And now can you keep him the rest of the way? So we just went over the luxury tax, $3.5 million in there, and it's kind of going up by the day because of Elfrid Payton on an unguaranteed deal that if you keep him on the roster, hits a certain point, and then, gets all the money, and he's going to fully count for the luxury tax, but it's prorated basically daily otherwise. So what do? There's Elfrid Payton in that roster spot. You could sign him, put about $2 million on your luxury tax, so that's about $5.2 million into the luxury tax. then you don't have a roster spot for Brandon Boston Jr. And so you can keep him on the two-way, but he can't play in the playoffs should they make it. And if you want him next season, it's best to sign him to a 2-year deal this year and next year. And they have abilities to do that. They've done that really well with other guys in the past, right? Jose being a really great example of that, I think. So what do you do here? And that's a good question. So signing both of them, let's say, puts you at about $4 million more. Now, all of a sudden, this team is looking at $7.2 million in luxury tax, and you're going to need to shed that somehow. I think that makes it unlikely that either both or one of them is going to be on the team. But how would you go about doing this? The obvious thing is, you try and dump CJ McCollum or Brandon Ingram and try and shed as much money as you can during that. Those guys are making $30+ million. If you trade one for a $26 million guy, which you can do, you can kind of get into the range of being able to keep both of these players for next season. But do the Pelicans want to do that, right? Look, you have Jose Alvarado, that's the backup point guard. He's a very different player than Elfrid Payton is. Payton has done a very good job. 21 assists is not a fluke. That was a pretty incredible, eye-opening performance for people around the league, I think. That was awesome. Brandon Boston Jr. has shown he can be a scorer on this team, and he's going to be better coming off the bench. And I thought, kind of adjusting to that already, he's done a pretty decent job, something we'll be keeping an eye on going forward. So, yeah, they make sense, but maybe you just like Jose Alvarado over Elfrid Payton more. Different players, but that you can't really have both of them, I think. So maybe you could trade Jose. Maybe you just don't re-sign Elfrid Payton. When it comes to Brandon Boston Jr., when you're kind of putting out this rotation, where do these guys fit in? Where do both of them fit in? And I think that's where it gets a little bit tricky when you're looking at the guys that you think, should be playing and should be getting minutes, right? Say you don't trade Brandon Ingram or CJ McCollum. They're in there. Zion, DeJounte, Trey Murphy, Herb Jones. We're at 6 people right now. Yves Missi, Jordan Hawkins, Jose Alvarado. You're at 9 already. Javonte Green is in there. That's 10. Where do these guys fit in? Is someone like Brandon Boston Jr. ahead of Antonio Reeves? Certainly is already. Is that what you need, though? And would Brandon Boston Jr. be getting minutes over Jordan Hawkins? I think Hawkins hasn't played particularly great this year. You could argue for that, I think. But, if it costs you tons more in luxury tax or makes you have to dump CJ or Brandon Ingram if you don't want to, is that the move you really want to do? And the answer to that's probably no. I'd be willing to bet. So I think when you look at that, it makes it tough to find ways to do it. It would come around the trade deadline, at that point, Elfrid Payton's deal is going to be fully guaranteed. That makes it kind of tough. There, again, ways to do it. You've got to make a salary dump kind of trade. So if the team kind of punts on the season and does that, yeah, you can sign these guys and you can have them on the roster for next year. But when you look at trying to kind of build a rotation, I don't think they're necessarily particularly high. I think I would put Elfrid Payton above Brandon Boston Jr., and I love what Brandon Boston Jr. has been bringing to the team, though he's kind of come back down to earth a little bit more recently. I like the idea of having one of DeJounte Murray or Elfrid Payton, kind of your floor general, on the court at any given time, given the difference that we saw the other night. This is why those moral victories matter. Now it's influencing the team building going forward based on what you've seen. And so it puts the Pelicans in a tough spot. But the answer is, yeah, they can do it. It's pretty difficult, and it might just involve straight up dumping Jordan Hawkins. That at least gets you one of them in there, and maybe you can start to kind of figure out how to get both in. But I think one of them won't be here, one will stay. And it's going to be interesting to see who the Pelicans determine that is going forward. So game tonight, it's the Pierre hats. Those are going to be awesome. Purple with a red beak, a little bit of the Mardi Gras colors, and the City Edition colors, City Edition court, City Edition jerseys. I'm excited for those. I actually kind of really love the City Edition jerseys this year. I bought a Herb Jones one because I like it so much. So I'm excited for this game. Maybe the Pelicans can get a win. That'd be fun to talk about on Thanksgiving for y'all. There will be a show on Thanksgiving and on Friday as well. And as always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I'll be back with y'all tomorrow to recap the game. See y'all next time.